The planet Sci-Fi was silent, except for the soft hum of glowing plants that pulsed with an eerie blue light. The air was thick with the scent of something unfamiliar, something alien. Ethan Carter, a lone human explorer, adjusted his oxygen mask as he stepped carefully through the dense jungle. His ship had landed only hours ago, and already he felt like he was being watched. He glanced at the device in his hand. The scanner showed no signs of life nearby, but his instincts told him otherwise. He had been on many planets before, but this one felt different. A rustling sound echoed through the trees. Ethan froze. "Who's there?" he called out. His voice disappeared into the darkness. No answer. Slowly, he reached for his blaster. The jungle was too quiet now. The wind had stopped. The glowing plants around him seemed to hold their breath. Then, a whisper. It was soft, almost like the wind, but it sent a shiver down his spine. Ethan turned quickly, scanning the trees. That's when he saw her. She was watching him. A tall, elegant figure stood between the trees. Her skin was a deep shade of violet, smooth and glowing faintly under the alien moonlight. Long, silver-white hair flowed down her back, moving as if it had a life of its own. Her eyes, golden and intense, locked onto his. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He had read about the species of Sci-Fi, but nothing had prepared him for this. The alien woman took a slow step forward. Her movements were fluid, almost hypnotic. She tilted her head, studying him with curiosity. Then she smiled. A dangerous smile. Ethan tightened his grip on his blaster, but something in him hesitated. She didn't seem hostile. Not yet. "Human," she whispered, her voice like silk. "You are fascinating." Ethan swallowed. "And you are." She chuckled softly, taking another step closer. "Zikara." Her name rolled off her tongue like a melody. "Why are you following me?" he asked, keeping his voice steady. Zikara didn't answer right away. She simply reached out, her slender fingers grazing the air between them. It was as if she could feel the space between them, the invisible tension pulling them closer. "I've never seen a human before," she murmured. "Your kind. You are strange." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You're the one glowing in the dark." Zikara laughed, a soft, musical sound that sent another chill down his spine. Then, without warning, she stepped forward, closing the distance between them. Before Ethan could react, her hand touched his face. His skin burned where she touched him, not with pain, but with a strange warmth. A tingling sensation spread through his body, making his heart pound. Zikara's eyes darkened, as if she had just discovered something new. Something dangerous. "You feel different," she whispered, almost to herself. "Stronger, warmer." Ethan didn't know what to say. He had met many alien species, but never one that studied him like this. Then she did the unexpected. Zikara leaned in and kissed him. Ethan's mind exploded with sensation. Her lips were soft but electric, sending a jolt of energy through his veins. He gasped, his body reacting before his brain could process what was happening. The world around him blurred. His pulse raced, his thoughts scattered. Then it was over. Zikara pulled away, her breathing uneven, her golden eyes wide with shock. Ethan staggered back, blinking rapidly. What the hell was that? But Zikara wasn't listening. She stared at him in disbelief, touching her lips as if she couldn't believe what she had just done. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. This is not supposed to happen." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" Zikara took a shaky step back. Her hands trembled. Her glowing skin pulsed brighter. "I need to leave," she muttered. "I need to think." She turned quickly, her body moving unnaturally fast, disappearing into the jungle. Ethan watched, still in shock. His lips tingled. His entire body felt different. What had just happened? And more importantly, Ethan stood frozen, his heart still racing from the unexpected kiss, His body buzzed with a strange, lingering energy, like an electric charge running through his veins. He touched his lips, half expecting to feel something different. But they were just his lips. Normal. And yet, nothing felt normal anymore. The jungle around him was silent. Skara had disappeared into the shadows as quickly as she had appeared. The way she had reacted, the fear in her golden eyes, it unsettled him. What had that kiss done to her? A rustling sound in the distance made him snap to attention. His instincts screamed at him to follow her. He didn't know why. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe something deeper, but he couldn't let her vanish into the darkness without answers. Ethan moved carefully, pushing past glowing vines and twisting roots. The bioluminescent plants pulsed faintly, casting eerie shadows in the alien night. He had spent years exploring unknown planets, but something about Sci-Fi was different. Something about her was different. Then he saw her. Seductress stood by a shimmering pool of water, her arms wrapped around herself, her back turned to him. Her silver-white hair flowed like liquid light, glowing softly in the dim jungle. She was trembling. Ethan stepped closer, trying not to startle her. "Seductress," he said, his voice low. She turned sharply, her golden eyes wide with something he couldn't quite place. Fear. Confusion. Longing. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. Ethan crossed his arms. "I think I deserve an explanation. What just happened back there?" Seductress took a slow breath. Her fingers brushed her lips, as if still feeling the kiss. She looked overwhelmed. "I made a mistake," she admitted. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "A mistake?" She hesitated. "My kind. We don't touch humans. We don't." She stopped, as if struggling to find the words. "It's dangerous." "Dangerous?" Ethan frowned. "You kissed me. I didn't exactly see you holding a weapon to my head." Seductress let out a breath, frustrated. "You don't understand. I didn't know what would happen. I didn't know you would feel like that." Ethan stepped closer. "Like what?" She shook her head. "Like fire. Like something I can't resist." Her words sent a strange thrill through him. He had no idea what she meant, but he could see it in her face. Whatever had happened between them, it had changed something inside her. Ethan studied her. Then why run? Seductress clenched her fists. "Because I want more." And that's never happened before. A heavy silence fell between them. The pool of water shimmered, reflecting the strange tension in the air. Seductress turned away, looking up at the alien sky. "My kind doesn't form bonds with outsiders. We don't feel attachment. We don't crave anything." She exhaled shakily. "But now, I do." Ethan's stomach tightened. Something about her words sent a ripple of unease through him. "What does that mean?" he asked carefully. Seductress looked at him then, her golden eyes burning with something raw and unfamiliar. "It means I can't stop thinking about you, and that shouldn't be possible." Ethan took a step back. This was getting weirder by the second. Okay, so maybe it was just a reaction. Something chemical. An accident. Skara's expression darkened. "No, it's more than that." She hesitated, as if weighing whether she should tell them the truth. Then, finally, she spoke. "Ethan, I don't think I can stop wanting you." His pulse quickened. There was something dangerous in the way she said it, something uncontrollable. Seductress took a step forward, her breath unsteady. "I shouldn't have touched you. I shouldn't have let it happen. But now, it's too late." Ethan felt the air shift between them. The jungle seemed thicker, heavier, as if the very planet was responding to whatever had ignited between them. Then, without warning, she reached for him again. Ethan reacted instinctively, stepping back, but she was faster. Her fingers brushed his wrist. Just a light touch, but it sent a powerful jolt through his body. His knees nearly buckled. His mind swam with a rush of sensations. Heat, desire, something deeper, something ancient. Seductress gasped and yanked her hand away, looking at him in shock. It's getting stronger, she whispered, her voice shaking. Ethan clenched his fists. What is? Seductress swallowed hard. The bond. Ethan's breath hitched. What bond? She looked at him, something almost desperate in her eyes. The one that shouldn't exist, she said. The one that means I can never let you go. A chill ran down Ethan's spine. He didn't know what was happening, but one thing was clear. This was no ordinary kiss. And whatever had started between them wasn't over. Ethan's mind raced as Seductress's words hung between them like a storm cloud. A bond. That couldn't be right. There was no logic in this. No science, no explanation. And yet, the raw intensity in her golden eyes told him she wasn't lying. He took a shaky breath, trying to steady himself. Seductress, you're talking like this is permanent. Her lips parted, but no words came out at first. Then, finally, she whispered, It is. A sharp chill crawled up Ethan's spine. He had heard of deep connections forming between alien species before, but this was different. This was immediate, intense, almost primal. And it was changing her. Seductress stood there, breathing heavily, her fingers trembling slightly as if she were struggling to keep herself under control. Her silver-white hair glowed faintly in the moonlight, her body tense with something beyond just attraction. Ethan took a slow step back. You said your people don't form attachments, that you're not supposed to feel this way. She nodded. We don't. Her voice was thick with emotion. We were engineered that way. My kind was created to be detached, logical, free from desire, free from need. Created. Ethan frowned. You mean biologically altered? Seductress hesitated before nodding. Our ancestors were warriors, bred for battle. Emotions were a weakness, so they were stripped away, generation after generation. We have never bonded with outsiders, until now. Ethan exhaled sharply. Then why me? She shuddered at his words. I don't know, she admitted, and that uncertainty terrified her more than anything. A tense silence stretched between them, the jungle humming with unseen life. The distant glow of Sci-Fi-7's twin moons bathed everything in a cold silver hue. Then, suddenly, she staggered forward. Ethan lunged, catching her before she collapsed. Her body was burning, heat radiating off her skin like she was standing too close to a fire. Seductress. He shook her slightly, panic tightening in his chest. What's happening to you? She gasped, clinging to his arm, her pupils dilated, her breath ragged. It's the bond, she managed to choke out. It's accelerating. Ethan's throat went dry. What does that mean? She lifted her gaze to his, something desperate flickering behind her golden irises. It means, the more I fight it, the stronger it gets, the longer I go without. She stopped herself, her entire body trembling. Ethan felt a sinking sensation in his stomach. Without what? Seductress pressed her lips together, struggling to say the words. But the answer was already written in her expression. Without touching him. Ethan stiffened. You're saying this thing, this bond, feeds on physical contact. Seductress inhaled sharply, nodding. Yes. She tried to steady herself, but her body betrayed her. She was weakening. I thought I could resist it, but I can't. It's pulling me toward you. Ethan felt a strange heat crawl up his spine. This was more than attraction, more than some biological reaction. It was rewiring her, breaking past whatever genetic barriers had been placed on her species. And worse, it wasn't stopping. Ethan. Seductress's voice wavered as she clutched his arms. If we don't break this soon, I don't know what will happen to me. His pulse thundered. Then how do we stop it? She hesitated. There's a way. But what? Ethan pressed. Seductress looked away, struggling to form the words. Then she whispered, It's dangerous. Ethan clenched his jaw. Of course it was. Before he could ask her to explain, a deep, inhuman roar shattered the air around them. Ethan's instincts kicked in instantly. He spun, pulling Zikara behind him as he scanned the dense jungle. The roar echoed again, closer this time. Something was coming. Zikara's grip on his arm tightened. They found us. Ethan's heart pounded. Who? Her golden eyes darkened with fear. My people. A sick feeling twisted in his gut. They're coming for me, she whispered. And if they take me back, I'll never see you again. Ethan's breath hitched. And then the shadows moved. Ethan barely had time to react before the jungle erupted with movement. The air crackled with an unnatural energy, and suddenly, they were no longer alone. Figures emerged from the dense foliage, tall, armored beings with sleek, dark suits that shimmered under the moonlight. Their glowing silver visors concealed their faces, but there was no mistaking who they were. Zikara's people. Ethan's heart pounded. He had fought his fair share of enemies before, but these weren't ordinary soldiers. These were engineered warriors, faster, stronger, and highly trained. And they had come for her. Zikara tensed beside him, her breathing unsteady. They won't let me go, she whispered. Ethan glanced at her, his mind racing. Then we run. But before he could move, one of the warriors stepped forward. Zikara. His voice was deep, emotionless. You have violated the covenant. Return with us. Zikara clenched her fists. No. The warrior tilted his head slightly. You know the consequences. Ethan felt the tension in the air shift. This wasn't a negotiation. This was a warning. He took a step forward, placing himself between Zikara and the approaching warriors. She's not going anywhere with you. The warrior's visor flickered as he turned his attention to Ethan. You are irrelevant, human. Ethan smirked, his muscles coiling with adrenaline. Funny. People always say that before they regret it. The lead warrior didn't respond. Instead, he moved. In a blink, he was upon them, striking with inhuman speed. Ethan barely dodged, feeling the air ripple as the warrior's fist missed his head by inches. The force alone sent dust and leaves swirling into the air. Zikara reacted instantly. She spun, her body flowing like liquid energy, her movements faster than Ethan had ever seen. She countered, her palm striking the warrior's chest. The impact sent a shockwave through the clearing. The warrior staggered back, but he didn't fall. He grinned. Zikara's breath hitched. No. Ethan's stomach dropped. If her strength wasn't enough to take them down, then. The warrior straightened, his glowing visor pulsing. You are not yourself, Zikara. The bond has made you weak. Zikara's hands trembled at her sides. Ethan could see it. The war within her. Her people were right. The bond had changed her, but they were wrong about one thing. It hadn't made her weak. It had made her human. Ethan clenched his fists, stepping closer to her. We fight together. Zikara looked at him, something unreadable in her golden eyes. Then she made her choice. She grabbed his hand. The moment their skin touched, a pulse of raw energy surged between them. Ethan gasped as his vision swam. His body felt weightless, as if he were standing at the center of a storm. And then, in an instant, he felt everything. He felt her fear, her desire, her confusion, her hunger, the overwhelming need to be close to him. But there was more. For the first time, he felt her power. The warriors hesitated, sensing the shift. Zikara exhaled, her body glowing faintly, her golden eyes burning like twin suns. The bond wasn't just changing her. It was changing him too. One of the warriors reached for his weapon. Too late. Zikara moved, but this time she wasn't alone. Ethan followed, his body moving in perfect synchrony with hers. He wasn't just reacting. He knew what she would do before she did it. Their bodies became a blur of movement, their strikes in harmony. Ethan had always been a skilled fighter, but this was something else entirely. He wasn't just fighting beside her. He was fighting as part of her. The warriors faltered, caught off guard. Zikara's lips curled into a smirk. Maybe I am different, she said, But I am not weak. The air crackled again, and the remaining warriors tensed. For the first time, hesitation flickered across their glowing visors. Ethan took a steady breath, his fingers still intertwined with Seductress. They had made their choice, and now there was no turning back. The night air was thick with tension. The warriors had retreated for now, but Ethan knew it wouldn't last. They were regrouping, recalculating their approach, and when they returned, they wouldn't make the same mistakes. Seductress sat by the fire, staring into the flickering flames, her golden eyes distant. She had barely spoken since the fight. Ethan studied her in silence. He could feel her turmoil, not just see it, but feel it. The bond had deepened, stretching between them like an invisible tether. It was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It wasn't just physical. It was inside him. "You regret it," Ethan finally said, keeping his voice steady. Seductress flinched, her fingers tightening against her knees. "I don't know what I feel." Ethan exhaled slowly. "They'll come back." "I know. And we'll fight them." She shook her head. "It won't stop." Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Then what do you want, Seductress?" She hesitated. The flames reflected in her golden irises, making them look like molten fire. "I don't know if what I feel is real or just the bond." Ethan's jaw tightened. That doubt had been creeping into his mind too. Was it truly her who desired him, or was it the alien chemistry that had taken hold of them both? The bond was overwhelming, intoxicating. But was it choice? Silence stretched between them. The jungle rustled with unseen creatures, but neither of them moved. Then, suddenly, she spoke. "My people were taught that the bond is a curse," Seductress murmured. "A weakness that makes us reckless, emotional." Her gaze flicked to Ethan. "But I have never felt stronger. Even when they tried to take me back, I wasn't afraid." Ethan smirked slightly. "Well, I wouldn't say fearless. You looked pretty worried there for a second." She shot him a dry look, but didn't deny it. A moment passed. Then she shifted closer, her fingers brushing against his hand. A shockwave of warmth spread through him, setting his nerves on fire. "This pull," she whispered. "I can't resist it, even if I wanted to." Ethan swallowed hard. His skin burned where she touched him, his heart hammering against his ribs. He could feel her emotions bleeding into his own, their connection growing stronger by the second. "We could run," Ethan suggested. "Find somewhere to disappear." Seductress shook her head. "There is nowhere to hide. My people will never stop hunting me." She hesitated. "Hunting us." A cold realization settled over Ethan. He had made his choice when he refused to step aside. He was no longer just a human caught in an alien war. He was part of it now. He glanced at her, his expression turning serious. "Then we don't run." She looked at him sharply. "What are you saying?" Ethan exhaled. "If they're going to chase us forever, we make it a fight they can't win." Seductress stared at him, reading the determination in his eyes. For the first time, a slow, knowing smile spread across her lips. "They will send more," she warned. "Then we take them down." She tilted her head, considering him. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, she reached out and took his hand fully in hers. The bond pulsed again, sending an electric current through Ethan's veins. His body felt lighter, stronger. Seductress's grip tightened. Together. Ethan met her gaze and nodded. Together. The jungle was no longer just a hiding place. It had become a battlefield. Ethan crouched behind the thick roots of an ancient tree, his pulse steady, his breathing controlled. Every leaf, every shifting shadow told him a story. The enemy was close. Too close. Seductress stood beside him, her golden eyes scanning the darkness. The connection between them had grown so strong that she didn't need to speak. Ethan could feel her thoughts pressing against his own, a silent current of anticipation and calculation. They had fought off a scouting party 2 nights ago, but that was only a taste of what was coming. Her people would never stop hunting her, hunting them. A faint hum vibrated through the air, a sound Ethan had come to recognize. The warships. Skara stiffened. They found us. Ethan didn't ask how she knew. He could feel it too. The bond had sharpened his senses in ways he still didn't understand. How many? He asked, checking his weapon. Too many to fight alone. Ethan glanced at her. Then we don't fight alone. She turned to him sharply, confusion flickering across her face. Ethan smirked. We've been on the run for weeks. We're not the only ones who don't want to live under their rule. Skara hesitated, then realization dawned in her expression. You recruited. I wouldn't call it recruiting, Ethan said, standing. More like giving people a reason to fight back. From the shadows, figures began to emerge. Humans, aliens, survivors of the Dominion's oppression. Some held stolen weapons. Others carried makeshift blades. All of them had the same look in their eyes, the look of people with nothing left to lose. Skara's lips parted in shock. Ethan, this is a rebellion, he finished. One that starts tonight. The warship's hum grew louder. The enemy was descending. Ethan turned to the gathered fighters. You've all lost something because of them. Your homes, your families, your freedom. He paused, letting his words settle. That ends today. A murmur ran through the crowd. They think they can take whatever they want, Ethan continued. That will just run. That will just hide. He shook his head. No more. A growl of agreement rumbled through the fighters. Weapons tightened in hands. Skara stepped forward, her voice carrying through the trees. This fight will not be easy. Her gaze swept over the crowd. But it will be worth it. She turned to Ethan, a fire burning in her eyes. He had changed her. She had spent her whole life believing the bond was a weakness. That emotion made warriors fragile. But standing beside Ethan, watching these people rise up because of him, she knew the truth. The bond didn't weaken her. It made her unstoppable. Ethan reached for her hand. The moment their fingers touched, a surge of energy coursed through them both. The warship appeared through the trees, its metallic surface glinting under the moonlight. Ethan smirked. Let's give them a war. The air was electric with tension. The jungle, once a silent sanctuary, now hummed with the presence of warriors preparing for battle. Shadows flickered as humans and aliens stood side by side, their weapons gripped tightly, their resolve unshaken. The rebellion had begun. Ethan stood at the front, his heartbeat steady. Every choice he had made had led to this moment. There was no turning back. He glanced at Skara, who stood beside him like a force of nature, her golden eyes glowing in the dim light. She looked alive, not just because of the bond, not just because of him, but because, for the first time in her life, she had something to fight for. A sudden boom shook the ground beneath them. The warship had landed. The enemy was here. From the treetops, rebel snipers took their positions. Hidden traps had already been set throughout the jungle, designed to lure the Dominion soldiers into chaos. The plan was clear: hit fast, hit hard, and never give them a chance to regroup. Skara's grip tightened on her blade. They will not stop. Ethan smirked. Neither will we. The warship's doors hissed open. Out marched the Dominion's elite. Tall, armored warriors with gleaming weapons, their presence radiating power and control. But Ethan didn't see invincible warriors. He saw fear. They had expected to capture one runaway. Maybe two. Not an army. A Dominion officer stepped forward. His eyes locked onto Skara. Surrender, he commanded, his voice cold, unwavering. You belong to us. Skara took a slow step forward. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Every rebel fighter held their breath, waiting. Then, with a voice like steel, she replied, Not anymore. The first shot rang out. Then another. Then chaos. Blaster fire lit up the jungle, streaking through the darkness like lightning. Ethan ducked behind a fallen tree, returning fire with precision. He saw rebel fighters engaging in close combat, using speed and strategy to counter the Dominion's brute force. Seductress was a blur of motion. She fought with a grace Ethan had never seen before, her movements fluid and deadly. The bond pulsed between them, sharpening his reflexes, making his strikes faster, his aim sharper. For the first time in his life, Ethan felt unstoppable. The Dominion soldiers were relentless, but they had underestimated something crucial. They had thought they were fighting a rebellion. They didn't realize they were fighting a revolution. A sudden explosion rocked the battlefield as one of the warship's engines was hit. The massive structure trembled, its hull groaning under the damage. Ethan turned to see a group of rebels holding detonators, their expressions filled with triumph. They had just crippled the enemy's escape. Seductress reached Ethan's side, breathing hard but still standing strong. "We have them on the ropes," she said. Ethan nodded. "Then let's finish this." With renewed energy, the rebels pushed forward, their battle cries echoing through the night. The Dominion forces, once so sure of their victory, began to falter. Some fell back, others stood their ground in desperation. Ethan spotted the officer who had demanded Seductress' surrender. He was trying to retreat, barking orders into his communicator. Ethan moved before he could think. He charged forward, dodging blaster fire, closing the distance between them. The officer turned, his weapon raised. Too slow. Ethan struck first, knocking the weapon from his hand, sending him crashing to the ground. The officer gasped, eyes wide with disbelief. Ethan leveled his own blaster at him. "You lost." The officer glared. "You think this ends here?" He spat blood onto the dirt. "More will come." Ethan tilted his head. "Then we'll be ready." Behind him, the battlefield had shifted. The Dominion was retreating. The rebels had won. For the first time in his life, Ethan understood what true freedom felt like. And it wasn't just his. It belonged to all of them. Seductress stood beside him, victorious. The bond between them had changed them both. It had made them more. This wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. This was a new beginning.